Franchise Secrets, Erik Von Horn.
If you're not a part of the Franchise Secrets Facebook group, what are you waiting for? It's franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. I cannot believe how valuable this group turned out to be. When someone asks a question, the feedback is honest, authentic, very helpful, and it's from multiple perspectives. If you're not sure that you're getting the most accurate information about franchising, then check out the largest, most helpful Facebook group in all of franchising. Whether you're a Z, a Zor, a buyer, or investor, join our free Facebook group at franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. Hey, this episode's all about executive coaching. So I brought in two people. One, Pete, who is my good buddy, Club Pilates franchisee, founder of Franchise Ramp. He's got 16 Club Pilates locations, and his executive business coach, who he's been with for 2 years. Now, he hired him 2 years ago, didn't know how long it would last. And here we are two years later. So I thought it'd be fun to have a very in-depth conversation with the two of them to talk about the dynamics of having an executive coach, what that really looks like, some of the pitfalls, some of the mindset shifts that Pete's had, and how it's really changed the way that he runs his businesses today. Now, Pete is off the org chart of both of his businesses. He's not in the decision-making, in a decision-making capacity on the org chart in his Club Pilates business or Franchise Ramp. Now, that might change at some point in the future, but this gives you a little taste of what you can expect to learn in this episode of Franchise Secrets with Pete and Michael. All right, guys. So we were just discussing what's the correct terminology of a coach and the person that they're coaching. I incorrectly called Peter the minion. I was corrected right away, not by Michael, but by Peter. But anyway, I want to get into like coaching dynamics. We got the coach and we got the client or the friend or the customer. And I thought it would be really interesting to, just have some Q&A with both of you as you guys have worked together and really leveled up in so many ways, Pete. As you've talked about it, you've been bragging about Michael, and Michael's bragged about you, and he's been in the mastermind session kind of teaching some of the mastermind members. So like you two, how do you describe that coaching relationship that you guys have? And then we'll kind of go into other areas of executive coaching, because there's going to be people that are listening to this that have thought about or are about ready to engage in an executive coaching relationship.
Yeah. I think when I thought about coaching, I thought about it being someone like yelling at you, like my high school hockey coach, like skate, skate, skate. I can still picture him saying that over and over. And, because that's what you kind of hear in the space, right? Accountability coach and partner and someone trying to push you. And there's I think what the relationship that Michael and I have is more, you mentioned friend, Erik. And so, definitely more of a friendship. And Michael can probably talk about the specifics, but, I think what I discovered pretty quickly when I was talking with different coaches and trying to figure out who to go with is that, I don't need another person, yelling at me, telling me what to do. I already have a really, really well-trained inner critic and inner voice telling me, to do that all the time. I need someone that's going to kind of question some of my assumptions and, really sort of help me dive in deeper into who I want to be versus what I want to be doing. So Michael's been really helpful in that process of just asking questions and kind of digging deeper. And then, that's what I would say, right, Michael? And so that's why Michael said we've really become more friends over time, because he has a certain sense of it's really like a judgment-free zone. And so I don't feel judged at all. And he just asks questions and kind of, we go in different directions. And so, I wouldn't really say it's coaching from a do this. It's more just, how you doing today, Pete? And then I talk for 10 minutes. So.
Yeah, it really does. I think aspirationally, you always want to be friends with the people that you work with, especially in a coaching context, because a coach, if it's going well, ends up knowing you just as well or better than just about anybody. It's somebody who you share your greatest wins with and biggest defeats and guilt and shame and things you're happy about or giddy about and joyful about. So to have that level of candor and vulnerability, I think is really always the goal. And I think coaching partnerships at their best are thinking partnerships. And so the fun dynamic that Pete and I have, to his point, right? He will catch me up to speed on what he's been thinking about, what he's been doing, what's been going through his head. And, we've certainly been doing this long enough, but a good coach is going to be well trained to see where a person's pattern of thinking and where it deviates from what they aspire to do. So it becomes pretty clear in some of those conversations and digging deeper and asking questions, right? Is how they're thinking in pattern and alignment and on the trajectory of where they're headed, or is it deviating or holding them back? And so in our own minds, we kind of lose the forest for the trees type thing. And so I found in getting it a lot out there, we're able to poke on things that we've assumed to be true or we believe are fundamentals, prerequisites, or requirements for how we need to show up and how we need to operate as leaders and business owners. When you really start to peel back the surface and kind of see the man behind the curtain, it often looks a lot different than how we originally think.
So let's go back to the beginning of Pete. Like, how did you find Michael? And I think that'll let us go into a little bit of Michael's background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was, I've kind of thought about the coaching idea for a long time and didn't really, I don't even know what really, well, I guess kind of the impetus, Michael and I talked about this was I read this book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it's a book by Marshall Goldsmith and it's maybe 15, 20 years old. And the premise of that book was the premise of the book is like what got you to the point on the ladder so far is not going to get you to the next point on your ladder, whether it's career or life, etc. And right at the same, so like I'm at this point in my life, or 2 years ago when I started working with Michael, I was at that point in my life, wherever that point was, right? And I was like, oh yeah, like I'm just having some struggles here, internally, like why is that? And it was pretty clear that like, yeah, I need to change my mindset to get to, the next level in life. And at the same time, I was taking this course, like just a quick, like kind of challenge course in December of like, finish out the year strong. And like, I had 80 things to do of like, do all this stuff, like, lift weights and eat healthy and like, all sorts of things. And I'd been doing that forever. And so kind of reading that book, I was like, geez, maybe I need like a mindset perspective or mindset shift or a little different perspective. And so I reached out to War Room. So Erik and I were members in War Room, like a mastermind group. And so just used their Facebook group and found some different coaches. And I was really, diligent about it. Usually I'd just be like, go with the first coach I met, but I met 3 coaches. I met like a former Navy SEAL, and I met a guy that advised a bunch of startups in Utah and Arizona, and came highly recommended. And then I met Michael's colleague with the Deeker group, and he was super helpful just in the 45 minutes we had. Him and Michael have a lot of the same ideas and concepts, and in the nicest way possible, he said, "You can't afford me." But I mean, I think he's worked with some, Fortune 500 executives, et cetera. And so he said, but Michael is fantastic, and we share a lot of the same thoughts and beliefs as it relates to coaching. And so that's how I met Michael. And just like right away, I was like, this feels like a good fit.
So you got rejected. I love that. You got rejected. You needed a coach now more than ever. And I know some of the companies that this gentleman has coached their CEOs of, and very, very impressive. So Michael, like, give us, like, you got that referral from this coach. Was this coach like a mentor, a colleague, a peer? And give us a bit of your background, how you got into coaching with all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that coach, his name's Heath Deckert, and yeah, prolific coach in the space and one of my best friends. So I started my career at Hewlett Packard, and that's where he and I originally met. So long story short, he got me my first job in big tech, worked there. He and I worked together. Sometimes I reported to his boss, sometimes I reported to him. And so we had this really fun kind of boomerang type relationship. And then after we did a lot of M&A work together, he said, hey, I've had it with this corporate stuff. I've done it for a while. So he left and started doing kind of this soul searching. And people said, you should either be an M&A negotiator or an executive coach. And thankfully, he chose the latter path. And so about a year or two after he had left, I was looking for kind of a similar opportunity to do something a little bit more meaningful. And I reached out to him, and I was one of his first clients. And so he and I started working together, and really outside of my faith and personal relationships was the most transformational thing I'd ever been through. Because I didn't know it at the time, but he was quickly on the track to becoming one of the world's best coaches. So I kind of got in. It's like, investing in, I don't know if it's Facebook, but a big company, very early stage. And so I was just very fortunate to kind of fall into that relationship and be able to kind of apprentice and then partner. And then he and I bounced back and forth different ideas. And I helped him grow his practice from an operations standpoint while he's teaching me to become a better coach. And then we're able to kind of split off, and we still collaborate on projects, but have a lot of fun doing it. And we actually live about 10 houses down the street from him. So we see he and his partner about 2 or 3 times a week.
And the
That's
crazy
awesome.
thing about Michael saying like he feels like he's on the ground floor, like I tell Michael the same thing. I'm like, when he's 30 or in 30 years, when he's however old, right? Like he's gonna be coaching Fortune 50 CEOs if that's the path he wants to continue to go down. I feel like I'm just in so early, and so feel so blessed and fortunate because of that. So yeah, it's interesting.
So did you negotiate pricing up front, Peter, so you can have that same price? And so when he's coaching the like major executives, you're still locked in like $100 a month or whatever you're at.
Locked in forever. We haven't talked about that yet, but maybe I got to bring it up.
Well, no better time than now. I'll kind of mediate.
No, yeah, have the grandfather clause. Well, my goal is always, I want to make you so financially abundant that it might always proportionally feel the same, but you're just, flowing at such a high rate that doesn't really matter so much.
So it sounds like your price rate will be increasing, Pete. I think that's great. I love it. I love it. But on the subject of pricing, like what's the range out there for executive coaches? And, you've got life coaches. You've got some of those that, they might have been, who knows what they were doing before they were a life coach. And then you've got, executive coaches that are, coaching amazing CEOs. So like, give us the spectrum of coaches from however you want to do that, however you want to give perspective to the audience, please do.
Totally. Yeah. So to your point, Erik, the coaching industry is a bit like the Wild West. One, it hasn't been around as long, so there's not as clearly defined paths, certifications, regulations, and things like that. So with that, you really do get a broad range. So to your point, right, some people might be, have gotten a certification or kind of a self-proclaimed life coach on social media. And so a lot of those folks kind of operate within, maybe a standard range of what you'd find a typical counselor. Those are the type of people that are kind of, really struggling with some of the life perspective things. They'll charge, between 100, 150 an hour, kind of have an hourly type work. And so that's kind of on the low end. And then on the high end, you'll have the Marshall Goldsmiths, Peter Bregman, Mark Thompson, who are coaching those top leaders and CEOs of Fortune 50 companies. And they'll charge between 20 to 50,000 a month on a monthly retainer, and sometimes they'll meet once a month or 4 times a month. And that's really a product of how the coaching industry works, which is because it's so unregulated and not standardized. It really, what coaches charge is a portion of the value that they can create. So it doesn't really, you don't really have, especially the top coaches, they're not, certified in X, Y, or Z. It's really how much value can they create for a leader. And that's why over 80% of coaching business comes through referrals, because it's the results, impact, the value created, and then a reputation is built along that.
That's interesting because some things that I'm doing. I have an hourly consultation / coaching. It's not coaching like what you do, but you know, people want to pick your brain. I'm sure you guys both get it. People want to pick your brain. I started to put a price on that. And there's no standardization of prices for picking your brain, but I learned some of it from, you know, going back to War Room with Roland Frazier. He's like, hey, you need to put a price tag on that. And, you know, it started out at $500 an hour, and then it was $1,000 an hour. Now my range is, my price point is $1,500 an hour if somebody wants an hour of my time. And it's, you know, it's an hour, they're an hour blocks. But it's just interesting too, once you start putting a price to your time. Like I had somebody today that said, hey, I want to pick your brain. I want some coaching, Erik. And I clearly said it's $1,500 an hour. And I said that, and in the next sentence, I just emailed them just before this podcast got recorded. I don't want to do coaching. Like, this is not what I want to do. I want to be doing these other things. I want to help you out in this other way. But it's interesting to, you know, it's value. As I charge $1,500 an hour, which isn't a lot of money for the value that I give. And so I love the tying into value. So with that, Pete, like, what are some of some of the things that you've seen as valuable that you've experienced with Michael? Like, if you had some franchisees sitting in front of you and they're like, hey, I'm thinking about getting an executive coach, hiring an executive coach. And they say, Pete, what kind of value did you get, or what kind of value should I be looking for in an executive coach?
I'd say just go talk to Michael. I mean, everyone gets different value, right? I you know, when I first did it, like it was outside of my comfort zone from like I've never invested that much in myself. I think I've invested a lot in businesses, whether, you know, we're doing EOS or taking some other like scaling up courses, et cetera. But I've never like invested just that much in myself. And so like, I just sort of looked at it as like a 3-month, like, let's see what happens in 3 months. And when we first started, Michael and I, he took me through a course that was 3 months long. That was called the Dream Builder course through Mary. What's her name, Michael?
Mary Morrissey.
Mary Morrissey. Yeah. And I'd never heard of her. And it's, what do we call it? A little woo-woo-y, but it's like, it's really good. It's about like build. And that's sort of what, like, even to this day, like what Michael and I's discussions revolve around oftentimes is like, what does that dream look like? Like, what is the life I want to have? And so that 3-month course really set in stone. And then after that 3 months, I was just like, this just feels invaluable to me, to have someone to bounce different ideas off of. I'm a verbal processor. I've discovered, and so like I need to talk to people about ideas, and I just need someone to listen, right? And so entrepreneur friends want to solve with you and like brainstorm, right? Like Brian, one of my good friends and business partner, like he wants to solve, right? He doesn't want to listen necessarily. I mean, he's a great listener, but like he wants to solve, right? You know, and my wife, same thing, right? Like she wants to solve, and like I can only put so much on her over, you know, the 10 years I've been a business owner, right? And so Michael's someone that's just the value in being able to verbally process and step through things. And then, you know, he just asks 1 or 2 questions and you know, gets me thinking about something else, and maybe gets me kind of going down a slightly different path. And so that's been the most value is that. I would say the other thing we've worked on too is, I alluded to a little bit at the beginning, is just this idea of, you know, we all have different personas and different sort of voices talking to us. And so really trying to identify those and understand like what they're saying to me. And so, you know, I have that voice all the time that's like, do more, right? And that's what, you know, some coaches do in the accountability space, and I just don't need that. And so that's one of the things I sort of discovered as well is just what are these voices trying to tell me, and sort of understanding what they're trying to tell me.
Is that pretty common, Michael? Like do more, and sometimes like we actually do less to get more of what we really want, even though we might not think it's what we want?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's incredibly, I mean, anybody who's on any sort of achiever spectrum, which Pete is certainly an achiever, and he's done many great things. And so many, for the most part, I work with founders, and that voice is incredibly prevalent. It's kind of a best friend and parent and coach and these things. And that voice, you know, has largely been used to help them become successful. But at a certain point, it creates diminishing returns in terms of overall satisfaction and happiness. As an entrepreneur, we're pretty much trained to want more and more and more. And then eventually we kind of hit a satiation point where, we've hit enough in some metric. And that more and more and more voice is still incredibly present. And so what do we do with that? And how do we kind of repurpose that desire for more in a more meaningful way?
So Pete, how has that like impacted your business? Because every time I talk to you or I'm talking to Brian, we always, I'm always like, hey, how's Pete doing? And it's like, Pete's always adding more stuff, more businesses, more locations, more of this. But at the same time, I know like even before we hit record, you're like, you've got a really good life right now. You've got time and whatnot. And I love that. So like walk us through some of the transformation or some of the decision making that you've done over the past number of years that Michael has helped with to help you kind of clarify the outcome that you want, that you're seeing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, man, we pulled a lot of weeds in the beginning. Like that's really, just like pulling out some of these bad mental processes, right? And we're still working on that. And maybe they're not bad. They served me right to the point that they served me up to a point like Michael sort of talked about. Like what?
Well, Pete, I think when we've removed those weeds, you are. And Marshall Goldsmith also says this about coaching. He said the secret to a successful coach is client selection. And so working with Pete is like you're automatically set up to be a success, which is really, really fun. But, after we remove some of those weeds, Pete, just who you are and the rock star that you are, I think continued to take off. When I think about, the footprint of the number of studios that you have and how like that's multiplied. Franchise ramp and the impact you've been able to have there. I mean, and even, your personal abundance, all these things, you like when things aren't holding Pete back, Pete is crushing it.
Yeah, I think maybe that's it. Like as entrepreneurs, like we have this abundance mindset, and then we can easily swing back into scarcity mindset. We kind of just go back and forth, right? Like I have this massive vision and then, what if this falls apart? And so I think what I've been able to do is just operate in that abundance mindset more. And the scary thing about the scarcity mindset is I think sometimes it's hiding, and you don't know that you're in a scarcity mindset. And so then you'll do certain things that may sort of inhibit your growth or kind of disempower your people. And so I think I've been able to really just live more in an abundance mindset that I have plenty of time and I have plenty of money and I don't have to worry about, not having enough time and not having enough money. I would say that's been probably the most help is just, kind of thinking through that idea of like, okay, I feel scarcity, but is that really true? And making sure that I think through that before I go to my teams. Yeah.
So I know a lot of entrepreneurs and I get to have really kind of open, honest, vulnerable conversations with them. And a common thing, especially if they grew up poor, like dirt poor. If they grew up dirt poor, they have this drive to be successful. And some of the most successful entrepreneurs that I know making many millions a year. So when I say successful entrepreneurs, I mean taking home many millions of dollars a year. And they're continuing to work 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week because they still have that scarcity mindset. Like it could be gone. And so do you see that, Michael, with other entrepreneurs? And it may not be those numbers. The numbers doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. But like that scarcity mindset, it's not like it's different than people might think a scarcity mindset is. Difference between scarcity and abundance minded.
Yeah. Well, we as humans are certainly loss averse. When they do studies, there's this great coffee mug example where they'll take a group of people and ask them, how much would you pay for this coffee mug? And they say something like $2. And then a separate group, they give the same coffee mug to, and once they give it to them, they say, how much would you sell this for? And they say $7, right? So we have this interesting relationship with not wanting to lose versus wanting to gain. And so certainly prevalent in terms of most people, and even with entrepreneurs. And I see that as well. Like a lot of times, right, people can come from a background where they've kind of got a chip on their shoulder and trying to prove something and said, this is what success looks like. And they just try to max out that. But then again, you get to this kind of satiation point or point of diminishing returns. And they say, okay, I've kind of maxed out the success. I've got as many, nice cars and toys and all this stuff as I could have ever hoped for as a kid. Now what? And I think to me, that's one of the most fun conversations to have with people, because it's really shifting from success to significance. And not that they are significant, but they can have a significant impact on others. And that, I think, can be really fun for entrepreneurs who are feeling, is this it? Because I've, double, triple, quadrupled my business very quickly, making more money than I could have ever hoped or thought I could make. So now what? And so there's there's a cool demographic of people that are wondering, do I sell my company? Do I, double it again? Do I lean back into personal relationships? And some of those big life questions pop up. And that, I think that in many ways is where a lot of the fun stuff comes out, because they're coming from a place of strength to really do a lot of good. And I see people still grow their businesses, but pivot the focus from, let me maximize a financial metric to let me maximize these other metrics that are more my team focus or my family focus, or, my city or my community, and how I'm leaning in there. And that really ends up being kind of that next chapter of meaning and redefining what success looks like.
So Pete, redefining success, what are some of the things that you went from monetary to other things that define success? And I know for me, I thought, boy, once I make $100,000 a year, I don't need anything more than that. And that was, it happened when I first started selling franchises at Liberty Tax, which is where you and I first met back in my 20s. I hit that, and then it would just hit different financial goals, double that, and, 10X that. And, I never thought I would achieve that level of financial success. And sometimes I would just swing the other way and go to the 4-hour work week. And then I would swing the other way and start working more hours. And so I've swung back and forth multiple times. And I feel like I have more a balance of that's probably, I don't know that that's the right term to use, because that will be a trigger word for some people, saying balance. But I've shifted priorities in what success means to me and whatnot. But for you, Pete, like, what's that look like? How has success shifted?
Yeah, the balance word is funny. Like, work-life balance doesn't trigger me, and like, oh, I gotta have work-life balance. But it's interesting. Like I think Michael and I tend to use the term full life. Like, how do I live a full life? Because work-life balance insinuates that like there's an active thing that you need to be doing to balance all of these plates, right? And it sounds stressful to balance work, balance life, balance personal. Whereas like, if I'm just living a full life, like the life that I live is sort of filling up in a beautiful way, et cetera. And so I don't know if that's why work-life balance triggers some people, but it's interesting. I had never heard that, sort of, kind of phrase or reference before, and I found that sort of helpful. I would say, so that like full life spectrum takes you through 8 different categories, 24 different subcategories total, and it doesn't really talk about like do these things, in these categories or in these gardens of life. It talks about like, what do you want your life to look like? And so it's funny, like I spend like what's most important to me on that full life spectrum is not where I spend a lot of my time, or most of my time, right? I still spend a lot of my time on work, when like my full life spectrum is saying like what other things are more important to me. And so I think it's a constant, sort of reminder that like, I need to be spending time on these other areas, or I want to be, not just I need to, but like I want to be spending time on these other areas. Whether it's, sort of creative pursuits. I'm taking a coding course or programming course now, or this idea of just money freedom, like not feeling guilty or bad about buying things, time freedom, like really appreciating the time I have. And I think relationships too, that was another area that I've sacrificed a lot in the last 10 years. So Michael and I started working about 2 years ago. So like I became an entrepreneur 10 years ago. And in those first 8 years, I sacrificed a lot of relationships, primarily like friend relationships, I would say. And probably even like children relationships to some degree, like I'm way more around I have a 5-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son. I'm around way more than I was like the first year of my daughter's life. And so yeah, I would say relationships is primarily the piece that we've opened more space for.
What do you see of that full life spectrum, Michael? Like how would you explain that to somebody that is probably not balanced? Like, where does that conversation start? Attention franchisors, if you are not bringing in many of the right franchisees, sales are slow. It's stealing too much of your time as a founder trying to award franchises to the right franchisee. There's a better way to do it. That's why I started the Franchise Sales Mentor. If you want to have access to the information, the techniques, the ways that the best franchise sales organizations are awarding franchisees, then you might want to check out the Franchise Sales Mentor. The reasons that franchisors join is because they want access. They want access to my Rolodex. They want access to my connections. They want access to shortcut both short-term and long-term success to increase enterprise value to their brand.
So what we found is there are these 24 areas of life, and they have different labels and different titles. Really, for the most part, if somebody is living intentionally in each of these areas, it really feels like a very full life. And so what we find is everybody's well in something, and there are other areas where they've or not spent enough time, or just really are operating off of whatever pattern or formula someone else gave them early in life. And so when you see the juxtaposition of really expansive and an area that's feel restricted, and you can kind of visualize that, it really is a compelling case to lean in and want to change. Entrepreneurs, if you see a problem, it feels like an opportunity.
Hey, Pete, let's go back over to you. And I want to know like what you've been saying no to recently, because, I was saying yes to so many things because it felt productive. It felt like I was moving things forward. And I was saying yes to things that I didn't absolutely love. I didn't enjoy. And so I started saying no to so many things. And I'm like, I'm only going to say yes to the things that I really enjoy doing, that bring me energy when I do them. Kind of like the whole EOS thing. I can't remember what that's called with EOS, but you're like, yeah, I want it. I get it. I want it, and something else, right? So I have that frame when I'm wanting to start new things, do new businesses, get involved in different businesses and whatnot. So like for you, as you've been, coaching with Michael, like, how much are you saying no, or like how often are you saying no to things, or has that shifted at all for you?
Yeah, I think it shifted a little bit. I've always been a very opportunistic person. I got into Liberty Tax after being on an airplane with a franchisee for an hour. Didn't even get his name. Got into Club Pilates pretty quickly. Brian and I started Franchise Ramp, and David with just really quickly. And so I think I've just tried to be a little bit more patient, as different business opportunities come up, and maybe not saying no right away, but just taking my time, doing the research and like thinking through it a little bit to see if it's something that fits. I'm sort of more going through a phase now where I'm not really on the org chart or accountability chart at either of the organizations that I own. And so I'm maybe looking for more things to say yes to. I've said no to being on those charts, and so you just naturally sort of get less. But yeah, I would say that makes saying no a lot easier when you're not sitting, in an organizational chart, or we use the term accountability chart. People just sort of know that the answer is no because you don't technically have the decision-making power, right?
So let's talk about that. Like, how did you come up with the decision, or what was that decision process like I'm assuming Michael had some good questions that he asked you, and, the dynamic of coaching. to get off of the org chart? Because I think that's a lot of people's dream. Like people get into franchising to not like work 100 hours a week, but they are going to put in the work in the beginning, but then they want to work on their business. So put in the work up front, work in it, and then you work on it. And then like, where would you say you are in that? Like, are you even working on the business anymore? If you're off the org chart, if you are, what does it look like working, or the impact that you have in the business by not being on the org chart?
Yeah, going back, I tell my wife yes a lot more, which I think is a win. I have just more space, right, to say that. I think on the accountability or org chart thing, I think so. So Michael actually started working. So I'm a part owner in Franchise Ramp, and before I started working with Michael,
hey, we've dropped Franchise Ramp's name way too often in here. Like, I think I'll hit up Brian, since you're not on the org chart, for like some sponsorship or whatnot. But keep going and keep mentioning it, because each time you mention it, it's like more sponsorship.
So we kind of pulled out, I think, right before I started working with Michael, and now Brian is hot back in on the org chart in the last like year or so. And so that was sort of predated it. And I think we just had a really great talent in Aaron, who's another owner as well, and who we recruited on. He's just fantastic. He's done a marvelous job really integrating all the pieces of that business and growing it. I think on the Club Pilates side, we, I don't know. So I was out of that business and now on the franchise ramp business. And so it's kind of like, you just feel like you need to add value by doing things, like I grew up in an entrepreneurial family, but it was still like, you do X to get Y. And so now that I'm getting Y and maybe like 10 Y, I'm like, oh, I got to keep doing X. And so, we've really worked on this idea of like, maybe the greatest value you can provide is actually not being as involved in the business and empowering your team and giving them autonomy and that sense of purpose. And so, I've gotten more comfortable, not perfect, but I've gotten more comfortable with like, my purpose is to, kind of unlock the greatness in others. And I can do that by just staying the heck out of the way at times, most of the time. Right. And so, and giving them the time and attention that they need. And so, part of this process, I was having such great results with Michael, that I was like, my key exec at Club Pilates, Crystal, I was like, Crystal should start working with him. And so they've been working together for a little over a year now. And like, that's been the most impactful thing is to see her growth, and just her growth is in every realm of the business. She's just gotten a lot more effective by working with Michael. And so that's allowed me to have a little bit of confidence, or much more confidence in the business, that I can step away, because that Club Pilates business is different. There's a lot of contingent liabilities with lease guarantees and with, debt guarantees, et cetera, where I still feel this certain like attachment, right? Where I'm like, oh, geez, do I really want to let go when I got, millions and millions of dollars of contingent and debt liabilities? And then, so I think the other thing interesting about Michael working with Crystal is that, sometimes he'll come to me and he'll say, Crystal's having this issue, and the issue is with you. He doesn't say,
and it can't be true. It can't be true.
No, he doesn't say it exactly like that. But and so that's really what sort of happened here was like, like maybe it's time to have Crystal sort of step into more of a leadership role where she was already handling all of the operations. Kind of giving her full sort of control, authority, vision throughout the organization. And so that's been really great. And that's just a transition we've been making over the last 2 months. And it was something that like I didn't see that he was able to see, by working with me and with Crystal together. So.
What kind of what comments would you have about like the process or just in the mindset around being removed from the org chart? So here's the deal with the Franchise Tribe Mastermind. It's full of a bunch of successful franchisees across many different industries, many different brands, and you get to be a part of that. Now, if you've had any level of success in franchising, you've probably been around top performing Zs in your current brand. So think about that. And if you could do that with 40 plus different brands, industries, franchisees, That's the value in the mastermind. I bring in some of the best speakers in the world. We talk about some topics that will never be talked about anywhere else. So if you're interested in being a part of a group like that, check out franchisetribe.com.
Pete's reached a spot where he's kind of transcended the org chart, right? This kind of level almost of enlightenment. And I think for a lot of entrepreneurs and franchisors, that's really the goal. And so that's one of the first things that we really start working on is who are the key people you need to be elevating so that they can really take those roles. Because a lot of times people are hungry to step into that leadership role, but it's that founder who really needs to be open-handed and give up control. And when that happens, you end up moving to that 4-hour work week type approach to operating the business. And those key folks can really run it. And oftentimes better than the founder ever could.
That's an interesting point. I'd love to throw Pete under the bus here. Probably can't though. But like, did the role outgrow him? Like, you know, you see a lot of, and I'm guessing it didn't because I know Pete. I don't think the role outgrew him. But I would imagine for others, like people that that I've known, that I've seen grow with a business, like they didn't have the capacity to take that business to the next level. I don't think that was Pete's issue because I know what, I know his abilities as a leader. But in general, talk to, a founder or maybe a franchisee that they might have, the role might have outgrown them.
No, I tell Crystal, I say, you're way better at this than me. So
what is she better at though? Like seriously, like what is she better at than you?
She's well, I think like, it's not just about the capacity or capabilities that someone has. It's also the like wanting to do it.
Yep.
And like, I just really did not want to do that. I'm not, and when you don't want to do something, you're just naturally not great at it. And so you look at Aaron at Franchise Ramp too, right? Like I didn't want to do that, and he wants to do it and loves it, and it speaks to him. And Brian doesn't want to do the integrator role at Franchise Ramp, right? He wants to do the visionary role, and it works out because they both want to do different things and they both work together really well. And I think it's the same with Crystal and I. Is like she's really good at. I mean, she's capability wise, she's just better at managing people. I think I'm a very great leader. I'm average at like managing people and holding them accountable. I'm also, from a leadership perspective, like average at giving people the time and attention they need. Like I just, don't give as much time and attention as I probably should. And that was another thing that Michael sort of, brought up when working with Crystal is, hey, Pete, maybe it'd be good to strategize a little bit more, just talk things over, not necessarily feel like you have to do anything, but just how can you give a little more time and attention and listening, with some of your key direct reports.
I can see that. I can see myself in like what you were just describing, reasons I needed to step back from different things that I was doing, because like you see value as an entrepreneur by doing things. And I didn't see the value in more leadership stuff versus managing. I used to think leadership and managing people were very much the same thing, but they're they're two different things. Or operations. Like I used to see great entrepreneurs, and you saw it too, Pete, in like, especially in Liberty Tax in the early days, you would see the best franchisees. And I would say they were great operators. They weren't like the best entrepreneurs, but they were great operators. They were great managers of people or great in operations. But there were some that were great leaders that have gone on to do other things in, beyond franchising or beyond Liberty. And you could see them just grow and do big things, like Brian, you and Brian have gone on to do bigger things. But I think it's because you're able to put the people that are good at managing, the people that are good at operations, put them in roles versus you guys doing it themselves. Michael, like how common is that?
Absolutely. Well, as a founder, you often see kind of that visionary really taking hold of things and being both a visionary and builder. And as you start to grow the business, you find the people who are really calibrated and specialized. As a founder, you're a generalist, and you're very good at being a visionary and just. But once you get the specialist, it becomes very clear. We've been talking about the EOS model, right? Get it, want it, capacity to do it. And certainly people who can really knock it out of the park on all three of those vectors. I see really being the best people to be running the day to day. And then as a founder, if you moving yourself out of the box, that means you go start something new, you expand the footprint of what you're doing, or you kind of retire, or go to the 4-hour work week, or sit on the beach for a few weeks until you get the itch to start something new.
Yeah, I think as like a founder or an entrepreneur, like you're just and most people in their background when they're raised, like they're just trained on this idea of, and I am the exact same way still, is like I need to keep pushing this rock up the hill, push. And so it feels weird to not have to push the rock anymore and still get the benefits from the work put in. And weird to me is guilt or shame. I think it kind of comes up in different ways for other people. But yeah, so like really just shifting that. And another way to look at it is the equation, right? Like I put in X, I get Y. Well, now it's like I put in 0 and I get Y, and that's just like, that's not supposed to happen mathematically, right? And so there's obviously some like, a lot of residual value that's going into that equation. And it's just different to think of putting in 0 can actually be a net benefit. And it's a little bit of maybe ego busting, because as entrepreneurs, we think like we're amazing, we've done this, we've built this, or we want to be this way, or like, the Elon Musks of the world, you have to be this like crazy great entrepreneur, Jeff Bezos, and push and be up at 6 a.m. and at the office until 6 p.m. and push. And in reality, like oftentimes you don't have to do that. And so it just takes a little bit of a reframing and kind of asking the question why. So that's what Michael's been able to help me with.
Where do you see yourself? Well, first of all, what's the Club Pilates look like now? Like how many locations across how many different states do you have?
Yeah, we have 16 locations across 3 different states, Arizona, Colorado, and Ohio. And we're really focusing our growth on kind of that Rocky Mountain region. So mainly acquisitions. We have some new development in the pipeline, but mainly Arizona, Colorado. And potentially we'll add another state here in a year or two.
So 16 locations. That's strong. With a great brand, a brand that does really well. I know some of the numbers in that brand, and that's awesome. Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? Like if you look 5 years out, I don't know how. I don't even know what's good to look at. Like Michael, like what question should I be asking Peter on his vision? Like, what is it like? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What would you ask him?
What would you like? What would you love for your life to look like? But I think the first question you had is pretty solid as well, because Pete does have a grand vision for that.
All right, Pete, next 5 years, and what do you want your life to look like?
Yeah, I think like your specific question related around Pilates maybe was, we've created this brand of empowered Pilates. And so we're trying to kind of create we follow the Club Pilates system, but we want to be different in order to attract great talent and potentially great investors as well, that hey, we have this, brand within a brand. And so that's the Empowered Pilates brand. And so we want to have 50 units or 50 stores by 2030. So 5, 8 years, 7, I guess we're at 7 years almost now on that. And so that's sort of like the ball we've started rolling down the hill, and we've just been having opportunities come our way by putting that out there into the world. I think, what do I want my life to look like in 5 years, or what does success look like is something that I'm continuing to just redefine, right? And so I think it, continues to be just living like saying, if I say X is important to me, then living my life like that. So if I say that, my family and friend relationships are important to me, spending time actually living that sort of life. I think that disconnect is what creates a decent amount of unhappiness in anyone's life, but particularly in my life. And so, I think in 5 years, I'm just spending time on the things that are truly important to me and enjoying that time.
Tell you what, it's fun to have friends in your life, and like friends that you grow up in the franchising world. Like that's how Pete and I first got to know each other. was back at Liberty Tax, and then through Club Pilates, and as he started Franchise Ramp. I was there in the early days when it was, back of the napkin type thing. And so it's just fun to have a group of peers and friends like Pete in your life. And all of you franchisees can have that. Even if you're first starting out in franchising, like and Pete has such great friends to this day that we met back in the early days at Liberty Tax. And that's where he met Brian, is at Liberty Tax, his business partner at Franchise Ramp. So we'll give a true shout out to Franchise Ramp. They're doing so much, and I think solely focus in the fitness world, specifically with exponential fitness, but we use them. I love them. So Franchise Ramp, check them out. Pete, if people want to get in touch with you, where do they find you?
LinkedIn, or just peter@franchiseramp.com is the easiest email I have.
He's a speaker in the masterminds. He's a giver. So I love that guy. And Michael, you've spoken to the mastermind. You did a master class on how to work with a coach and everything about executive coaching, which was fantastic. But any last bits of wisdom for you that you would want to leave the franchise founders and franchisees with, and then let people know how they can get into your world?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love your note on friendship, and that's really how we started this conversation. I think business in its highest form, and in a low form, it's transactional. At its highest form, it's about relationship. And so to your point, when you can find and build and foster friendships with colleagues, with customers, with clients, coaches, whoever, that makes business so much more fun and rewarding and lasting. So if there's any wisdom, I'd say do not be shy about forming friendships, even in a work context. And then, best way to reach me is Michael@Cornerstone Leaders. My website's cornerstoneleaders.com. And I love chatting with people about franchises and leadership. So feel free to drop me an email or line, and would love to connect.
Do you have a podcast yet?
I've done a few different I actually did a blockchain.
Do you have your own podcast?
I had my own blockchain podcast, but I've been thinking about, this has been so much fun. I was thinking, wow, we should probably start something. So probably in the works, and maybe I'll have you as one of the first interviews.
Dude, I would love that. And I think it'd be interesting. People would find a lot of value in having an executive coach, hosting a podcast. I think that would be fascinating. I think people could find a lot of value in that. So I hope you do start one. And I'd love to be a guest, and I'd love to be a listener. So thank you both for coming on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Erik. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Franchise Secrets Podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, please make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to whatever channel you're listening on. If you want my help with anything from buying a franchise to franchising your business, please visit franchisesecrets.com.